Now, a lot of people believe that horror and comedy are two sides of the same coin, and for decades, comedy-horror mashups like Shaun of the Dead, Beetlejuice, and Little Shop of Horrors have kept movie audiences laughing and screaming at the same time. And while it didn't create the comedy-horror genre, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein was one of the first movies to blend the genres successfully, resulting in a movie that scored big on the laughs, but also stayed true to the horror. So join me as we pry open the lid of one of my favorite Halloween movies, the 1948 classic Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. About 5 years before work even began on Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello were kicking around the idea of a story involving their characters and some classic monsters, not for a movie, but as a Broadway show. Realizing that the effects and the makeup may be tough to do on stage the way they wanted, they put the project on hold. That was until Universal Studios came to the duo asking what project was next for them. Universal had been the home to the classic movie monsters, including Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster. So merging Abbott and Costello with their monsters seemed like the perfect fit. From that idea, a script titled The Brain of Frankenstein was created, and everyone was ready to go. Everyone, that is, except Lou Costello. He hated the script and reportedly told the studio execs that his 5-year-old daughter could have written something better. The studio asked Costello to trust them, and when they paid him an advance of $50,000 on his salary and agreed to hire his friend Charles Barton as the director, he agreed to make the movie. Part of the reason having Charles Barton as the director was such a win for Costello was that he knew that Barton felt that having fun on set would result in the cast having fun on the screen. Keeping everyone loose and laughing was so important that they actually hired comedian Bobby Barber to hang out on the set just to tell jokes and perform gags for the cast and crew. Thanks to the influence of Barber, everything from dressing room pranks to pie fights were a regular part of the production. He would even interrupt shots on the set just to keep everyone laughing. And as a thank you to him, Barber was even given a role in the movie. That's him playing a locker room attendant at the masquerade party.
Have you seen Chick Young or Wilbur Gray?
Seen them? I don't even know them.
While most of the cast and crew appreciated the fun they were having off-set, Bela Lugosi didn't appreciate when the jokes made their way onto the actual set. He was fine with the jokes and even with the pie fights, but when Barber followed Lugosi down the stairs in one shot, a frustrated Lugosi walked off the set. Abbott and Costello had honed some of their best gags to perfection during their years spent on the road doing live shows. Many of those gags and even full routines often made it into their movies, so it shouldn't be much of a surprise to learn that even gags they had done in earlier movies made their way into Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. One example is the moving candle that Costello sees when Dracula is opening his coffin. A similar gag was used in Hold That Ghost 7 years earlier. Another example is the scene during the masquerade party where Costello picks on the Wolfman thinking it's Abbott in his costume. They used this gag 3 years earlier in the naughty 90s when Costello thought he was wrestling with Abbott in a bear costume when he was actually wrestling a real bear. Abbott and Costello's comedy often centered on great one-liners. But physical comedy, especially Costello's reactions to something happening in the scene, were just as big a part of their appeal. And making a shot a little more realistic often meant a funnier payoff for the joke. A great example of this is the scene where Frankenstein's monster punches through a door. The plan was for Costello to be back a little more so the punch would go in front of his face, but Costello intentionally missed his mark, meaning the punch would hit him squarely on the side of his head.
Well, we got him.
Director Charles Barton liked Costello's reaction so much, he decided to keep it in the film. Now, because Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein was budgeted by Universal as a B movie, they needed to trim costs wherever they could. Jack Pierce had been the head of Universal's makeup department for years, but his techniques on the original monster films often meant hours and hours of time for the actors to transition into their characters. Realizing that they couldn't afford these delays, the team turned to Jack Pierce's assistant, Bud Westmore, and makeup artist Jack Kevin to develop a faster way to get the actors into their makeup. The two artists created foam rubber pieces that could be glued onto the actors, cutting the time from 3 or 4 hours down to just 1 hour. While the pieces were faster to apply and more comfortable for the actors to wear, there was a downside. Glenn Strange, who played Frankenstein's monster, had the top of his head completely sealed in the foam rubber skull of the monster. This piece had no ventilation, so all the actors' sweat would just collect in the piece, and by the end of the day you could hear the collected sweat sloshing around inside the cap. And when he finally took it off, the sweat would just pour down his face. Bela Lugosi, of course, played the part of Dracula 17 years earlier in the original 1931 film. And while it's the character he's most known for playing, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein was only the second and would ultimately be the last time he ever played the part of Dracula. Now, Lugosi did play a vampire type of character in other movies, including in Plan 9 from Outer Space, but in each of these performances, he's playing a vampire other than Dracula. Alright, so a quick recap on the actors and the monsters they play. Bela Lugosi was Dracula, Lon Chaney was the Wolfman, Glenn Strange was Frankenstein's monster, and Lon Chaney was also Frankenstein's monster. That's right, Lon Chaney played the Wolfman during most of the movie, but in one scene he also played Frankenstein's monster. That's because one day on the set, Glenn Strange stepped on a camera cable and broke his ankle. Lon Chaney wasn't scheduled to work that day, so he put on the costume and the makeup and filled in for Strange. Chaney only filled in for one scene though, so if you want to see him as the monster, you'll have to look closely. In the scene where the monster throws Dr. Mornay through a window in the lab, that's actually Lon Chaney under all that makeup. For classic movie fans, Boris Karloff has been the perfect actor to play Frankenstein's monster ever since his first appearance in the role in the original 1931 film. After performing the role 2 more times in Bride of Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein, Karloff retired from the role. Despite not being in the movie, Karloff did agree to do some publicity for the film, appearing in photos of him standing in line to get tickets to see the movie and looking at the poster for the movie. And according to several reports, Karloff agreed to do the publicity as long as they didn't ask him to actually see the film. Ultimately though, Karloff was not opposed to the Abbott and Costello versions of the monster movies, since he appeared in 2 movies with Abbott and Costello in the 5 years following the release of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. He appeared in Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer Boris Karloff in 1950, and Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 1953. My next fact is a quick one, just a little recognition for animator Walter Lantz. Famous for creating Woody Woodpecker, Lantz was called in to create the animation of Dracula turning into a bat, and back from a bat into Dracula again. And the final facts I wanted to share were a series of goofs that were left in the movie. The most well-known of these is the scene where Costello is sitting on the monster's lap. This scene took several takes to get right, with Costello trying out different gags each time they started shooting. Glenn Strange, as the monster, had a hard time keeping a straight face through the shot, with several takes ruined by him laughing out loud.
I can't help it.
In the final version that made it into the movie, you can still see the monster crack a little bit of a smile as he gets up to try and grab Costello. The monster wasn't the only one having issues on the set. Dracula had an issue as well, adhering to some of the traditional folklore about his character. Specifically, vampires aren't supposed to be able to be seen in mirrors, but when Dracula bites Dr. Mornay, we can clearly see him in the mirror behind them. And there you have it, my list of some great useless trivia about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And as always, if you have a favorite piece of trivia about this movie that I didn't include, please let me know in the comments below. And don't forget that I post a new video about another classic movie every Monday morning, so please be sure to subscribe if you'd like to get an alert when the new video goes live. And finally, thank you again for watching A Million Movies, and I hope to see you again here soon.